Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by Pat Flynn and his team at SPI, or Smart Passive Income. I am often asked questions about how I do all the things I do, whether it be this podcast, our cohort-based courses, or just structuring my business. Well, Pat has been a great inspiration to me, and I benefit greatly from being part of his community, SPI Pro, and from the SPI courses and workshops they offer. We are including a link in the show notes where you too can apply to be a part of SPI Pro or take advantage of their amazing courses and workshops. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm really greatly honoured today to be joined on International Women's Day by a very inspirational woman in industry. I'm joined by Deborah Wathen-Finn. Deborah is the president of the Wathen Group, and she helps companies in the transportation and the infrastructure sector to help implement effective change management. And she's also a revitalization expert, and that is going to be a key topic that we do discuss today. So once again, greatly honoured to be joined by Deborah today. So please, Deb, say hello to our audience, give a little bit more about your background, and tell us what led you to be with us today.
Okay. Good morning, Mick. It's so good to be with you. So how did I get here? I had the opportunity to work in public life for about 25 years with incredible mentors, both men and women. And I honor them on this International Women's Day because there were men who saw that as an exciting opportunity to help advance women in infrastructure and transportation. But I ended up working for very dynamic types of people. Lou Gambaccini, who's a legend, Ann Camby, Shirley DeLibera, who those two women broke the glass ceiling back before we even knew about the glass ceiling. But they encouraged me to get a wide range of experiences in the transportation industry. And I spent 25 years in the public side. But in that time, I was part of teams that created new initiatives, did major turnarounds. And at a very young age, I was empowered to do that by these dynamic leaders. So I had laboratories and I was grounded in a really good education. I had an education in political science, which certainly helped in stakeholder development. But also in my graduate work, I did work in around organizational development. I became fascinated by thinking about the policy implications, operating needs, but thinking about it from an organizational development perspective. So I did that, and I've had great experience of going in and turning around some really tough situations, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, and creating new initiatives. And I eventually decided that I wanted to try those skills in private sector, and I had an opportunity to build a regional-based company and a global-based company. And then I was finally like, I've always wanted to have my own business. Why don't I take that portfolio of skills and take it in terms of creating a company that could do that both in public and private sector? And it's just been a great ride. We've had great clients. We've had some really tough challenges. And we've worked with mature businesses that sort of lost their way with their client base and their employee base. Same thing with public sector and startups. And it's just been a great mix of portfolios. And so today I can reflect back on those experiences as I do this with you today, Mick, or when I present tomorrow to a really challenging situation for another potential client. because I have that experience and can speak to it, not just in a theoretical model, but I can do it in a way that will show you how we got there in a very good narrative manner, which I think that's part of what we have to do to create change, because then you're believable when you can do that.
Yeah, we're very much interested to get into that, around that change management, around revitalisation and reforming teams. There's a lot of topics that I'd love to cover with you today about your expertise. Before we get into that, as an inspirational woman in the transportation and in the infrastructure sector who inspires men and women alike, can I ask you, what drew you to transportation and infrastructure in the first place? I'm going to say it in a very nice way, it is a very male-dominated industry. What was it that lit you up?
Whenever I tell people, the president of my college, I remember the first day I got to campus, used the word serendipity. And he encouraged us to go to the library and just pull books out in a serendipity fashion, because a liberal arts education is about that. And I've given several speeches, including at my college, to students going, how did a liberal arts major like me end up running a railroad? I mean, I didn't think I was going to do that. I knew that I was going to spend some time in public life. I really was inspired to be in public service. It was what was going on at the time that I was a young child, and through the early 70s with all the protests and everything. But I got out of grad school with a degree, and part of my degree was in public administration. So I was going to go work in some sort of public-minded place. But serendipity brought me to this place that I met Lou Gambaccini, who became one of my dearest friends. And he was visionary and exciting about how he drew a picture of what was possible in New Jersey when the whole system had fallen apart. And he was named by the governor at the time to turn it around. And I was like 25 or something. And he hired me to be on his team. But it was because I heard him talk and describe how important transportation was to the fabric of our lives, right? And so I was working with him, and I did constituency development in a pretty heady thing. It was like being at Camelot, like they talk about the Kennedy administration. And I saw what we were doing for the state, for the region in doing that. And transportation just came alive. I didn't know I was going to be in transportation. I knew I was going to be in some sort of public purpose role, but so then I just loved it. And then as people coached me to get operating experience, once I started getting into operations, that was so exciting, because I knew that I made a difference every day to my employees and the customer base. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a difference in this world, whether it's in this small area or on a larger platform. But I didn't know when I was in college. I didn't say, I'm going to go work in transportation.
I'm hearing three really powerful things there, Deb, and I just want to test them with you. And please, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So if there's anything that you disagree with, just go ahead and say, well, it's not quite what you meant. So I'm hearing, firstly, the power of having that visionary leader that was able to paint a picture and show a world where you wanted to be part of that world. That's the first one. And then the second and third one are both about making a difference. And you said it multiple times, but you said it with two different lenses. And I think that's potentially important. Making a difference in everyone's life by making it easier for them to move around their cities, to be able to get to and from jobs, be able to get to and from the supermarket, and that quality of life that comes from the ability to move around your city. So everyday citizens making a difference for them. But then you also said, when you stumbled into operations, that making a difference to your employees and to your team members and to the stakeholders working around you. What makes that so important to you, that latter part of making a difference for those that are working around you?
Well, I have years of feedback that gave me that excitement and passion about that. I think I told you this story, Mick, a long time ago when we were talking about this. When I was a kid, my dad was in manufacturing, and he had 4 daughters. He would take us with him to the plant before he rose in very high levels of this Fortune 500 company. And I remember watching him talk to his employees, whether it was about what was going on in that production line or asking them about their families. And I saw how engaged he was, but how they were. And I saw that, and I saw that with my grandfather, because of course, my grandmother and my mother were not in the workplace at that point in how the world was. And so then when I had a chance to be in management, I knew that that's what you were supposed to do. And I love people. I think that will come across. I love people. And I was always taught it didn't matter what level somebody was, that they all matter and you treat them with respect. As a boss, you have to sometimes say the things people don't want to hear. But as I worked with teams, and every time I got a job to manage people, I was given some of the most challenging assignments. Some of it was because they didn't think I could succeed, because when I first went to the railroad, I hadn't ever come up through the ranks in the railroad. And usually the general managers were people that had been a conductor or a locomotive engineer. I had strong management skills, but I didn't have the subject matter expertise, although I had been working there as the chief of staff and I was learning, because I'm a liberal arts major. I can learn anything, right? But I got out there and I saw how poor the morale was, how they didn't believe, they had horrible metrics. And I used those, I started to involve the employees, the rank and file, not just the managers. The managers, it was a very hierarchical, as it is in the railroads, paramilitary. And I started opening up the dialogue. And I remember I was at a safety meeting and it was run by the managers. And the rank and file were saying words like your safety committee, your yard. They weren't saying our operations, any of that. And as I started to ask them questions and actually changed the membership and actually suggested that we rotate a manager versus a labor or unionized person, an agreement person as chair. And they started going for walks along the line, identifying it. And all of a sudden the words started changing. And then we did that around on-time performance because it was the worst run line. And it ran across 3 railroads, which is really not easy to get strong on-time performance. But a lot of people were going into Manhattan, Wall Street, making decisions about valuations, whatever. It was across Amtrak, Conrail, and New Jersey Transit. And I gave them a sense after I talked to them and they were saying what things could improve. We started doing some of those things. And I would, tell them in the course of conversation or updates in written communication. And then I said, if we get 100% on-time performance, they didn't believe they could ever get there because they operated on 3 railroads that dispatched. Mick, I could hear it on the radio. They were starting to believe that they could do it, and they'd get to 5 days on 100% on-time performance. And then they get to 6 and then go back down. And I said to one of the folks, and if you do it, I'll buy you a steak dinner. I don't know why I was thinking, but I said it but what I saw in those people when they started having the best safety record, the best on-time performance, ended up being the best customer rated line because we empowered them and took their thoughts and they owned it. And I gave them the resources to do that. But just one vignette. I remember we cooked steaks because that was the price tag that we had to have. We bought steaks at like the ShopRite and we cooked it. And I had all of my managers like, oh, we're going to do all this. And I sat down with one of the conductors and we're sitting there talking, oh my gosh, I've never broken bread with the boss. He said, do you know how much this means? And I was just like flabbergasted because I remember going back to my dad where they had employee picnics and my dad would drag all of us there. And we loved it. And so the joy that just that personal connection that you matter and seeing, I could never have gotten to 100% on-time performance and raised the metrics by directing it. I had to be a different kind of manager where they were inspired and felt that they were heard. And believe me, there were people that I have a thing that I got that says, oh, you want to play hardball? Because one of the engineers just did not like having dialogue with me because he was not a quality employee. So, I mean, but all of them came through to do that. And so that really reinforced the model that my dad had taught me years ago. And as I went up in the organization, I used that and became such a believer about what's possible when you engage the employees. You create this force. And in fact, the literature says if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your customers. And I mean, you still have to do some of the things that customers want, obviously, but you have a different workforce that feels good about going to work because they've been valued and listened to and accountable when they don't do their job, but clarity about those things from the boss, but not to be so that you can't empower them and hold them accountable. It's just, it's the world's the limit of what's possible when people are working as a team. It's like 1 + 1 = 3 or 5, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so I think I must have said this statement on the show countless times now. My audience may be sick of hearing me say this one, but my favourite quote is an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And that's what you're doing there, Deb. There's a number of different things that are really resonating for me there, or really picking up on what you're saying there, that picture of you walking the shop floor with your father and seeing that it's quite natural to treat people like they matter. And when you do, well, they will matter. They will do things for you, and they will follow you, and they'll be inspired to want to do a better job. And you're finding that quite natural yourself because you saw that as the role model of how to treat people, everyone from the shop floor upwards, right?
Right.
The other one about the engagement and the empowerment, it's making me think of a great interview we did with Jake Jacobs in season 1. And I'd like to share this quote with you and get your reflections. So Jake's view was that a lot of people are scared about change management, and you're a change management expert, and people shine away from it and say, oh, I'd rather do anything else but change management because people don't like change. And Jake's view was, it's not that people don't like change. It's people don't like being changed. Right? So when the change comes in from on top or from the side or from wherever it's going to come, and someone comes in and goes, right, new change initiative, everyone, this is what we're doing. That's when they resist. It's not that they don't like change. They don't like being changed. What's your reflections on that?
I love his quote. So I have a couple of thoughts about that. I love change, so I'm great at change. I love it. But I think that what has happened in many organizations, that sometimes change is just change, and it's not linked to a strategy that is understood and communicated well. So I always found that we both, when I was leading organizations and now as a consultant, we always build in a feedback loop from the frontline employees and the first level of the organization. And we do it through employee surveys, through focus groups. And I personally run a lot of the focus groups because they're so rich. And I found, even when I was a leader, people were pretty candid with me. Now, sometimes they just try to do that to tell the boss the first time they get to see them. But when you take that information and regularly communicate what the findings are, usually the employees have a similar assessment of the organization. They'll personalize it to themselves, right? But change works when you make sure that you have information, and that helps to inform your strategy. And you also communicate on a regular basis what you found. And you have to do it at all the different levels. And then with change, what happens is a lot of times the frontline people or the employees will go, oh, good, this is a new boss. They're going to change it again. And they don't see a difference. But if you link it to metrics and make sure people understand their role in this change, if it's employee engagement, if it's to improve morale, we've heard this and we see these things, but we need your help in that. For example, one of the things that you see a lot in the transit industry is that there's a lot of overtime because there's a lot of absenteeism because the morale isn't always that good. But if you spend time with the employees and give your supervisors tools for how they engage with those employees and express interest in them being safe and well and noticing patterns, you eventually get them the help they may need, because they may need an EAP program. They may have a problem at home with dependent care that they haven't wanted to tell anybody about. I mean, now it's easier to talk about this. But if they start to see that, and then you are able to report, look, absenteeisms are down because we're getting resources, and now we can use that extra funds for something else for the employees. I mean, those are simple examples. But what I found is the boss, the leader creating change, usually their direct reports have signed on to the change because they've either been hired or designated. And frontline employees generally want the change because there's a disconnect and they're experiencing that, right? But a lot of times their supervisors aren't trained in how best to communicate that change message. So if it's not cascaded down, they can't say that. So there's a disconnect and people feel uncomfortable. But the other part about change that I think also makes this challenging, and I don't know if Jace feels this way, but I found that the middle management is most threatened on change. So if you are not looking for ways to empower them and get them involved and hold them accountable for making sure that changes are done with things like, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction that rolls up to them. And you'll see pockets of the groups that are supporting the change, and there'll be pockets that won't. So you could just say, well, those that aren't doing it, you're gone. No, you want to make sure that people see that they can trust you to make the change and help to give them the tools that they can communicate and help with that change, right? I mean, if it's to be more customer driven, they might not have understood that the way they talk to their employees is how the employees will then go talk to the customers. So can I give you an example?
Yes, please do.
So when I was a general manager of a multimodal agency a number of years ago in my career, probably halfway through my career, once I got there, I was told it was a postal office environment ready to implode. They didn't tell me when they offered me the job. They told me afterwards. And they we brought in some people to help work at the shop levels and in the depot levels to help them work through the issues of those locations, because there were some that were really serious problems. But we also found, as part of that assessment, that there was poor communication skills. Probably no surprise. The world is full of miscommunication, right? So we brought in somebody, we created a different kind of approach that I had helped to create when I was at New Jersey Transit. And it was using communication skills, not saying we want customer service, but we want improved communication. And so we did it around the product, to the interface with the customers. But what happened is I had supervision management all the way to my direct reports participate in those training, in some version of the training. So what we were asking, how we were asking the employees to interface with the customers, we were using for our supervision and managers. And so you could see over time, those work units that had lower customer service complaints, less grievances, which grievances are those disagreements among a worker and supervisor manager that goes to some type of adjudication within a labor practice. And so we saw those things in some work units. The interface with the customer was much improved. Grievances were down, absenteeism was down, injuries were down. And there were other work units that they weren't there. So we knew that those supervisors and managers probably were not using the skills. And so we talked about it and we got them more training and we gave them a few chances. And some didn't belong in those jobs. But then I would have employees say, frontline employees say, oh my God, this made a difference. My work environment's better, unsolicited to me in many ways. And some even said, my marriage is better because I took this program. So anyway, to see, it's kind of like I have 2 children. It's seeing a whole bunch of people that you're responsible flourishing, and some don't belong in those jobs and you have to move them out. But so many people just want to do a good job. And how exciting is that when you're seeing your numbers and you're seeing the feedback from stakeholders and employees? It doesn't get better than that. You know you made a difference.
Yeah. Coming back to making a difference again there, Deb, another observation there. Yeah, some interesting things there, right? So one of the things you said there is that people want to turn up and do a good job. And I believe that. I mean, people, they can lose their way, etc. But even bad leaders, bad bosses, every employee, they don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to go to work today. I'm going to do a bad job. They actually want to do a good job and they want to have impact. They want to have purpose and meaning in what they do, and they do want to have impact. And using some of those metrics, I can see there that you're showing them that, hey, this is working. The work you do is making a difference. So I think that's quite refreshing. The 2 underpinning things that I heard there were communication and empowerment as the 2 keys there, and listening to you talk about what I call the messy middle. And that's not the first time that we've heard that the messy middle is where these change efforts often come asunder in either direction. The voice of the shop floor is not making it to executive management because of the messy middle, or the vision and the direction of the executive is not making it in a meaningful way to the shop floor because of the messy middle. And one of the things that you said was that they feel threatened. I want to add one more and then get a reflection from you about how we address both of these ones. So one is they feel threatened. The other one that I've seen a lot is that they get change weary, Deb.
Yes.
So you get in this situation where in an organisation there's been one change initiative after another, and it's the flavour of the month for 3 months, 6 months, and nothing really happens. What happens there is a bit of a learned behaviour where that messy middle, which once again they may feel threatened as well, they work out quickly that if they just ride the storm, Yeah. That it'll just go away. So they pretend that they're on board, but in reality, they're not fully on board and they're not engaged. What's your reflection on that? And secondly, what can we do to break it?
You are on the mark. This too will pass if I wait, and particularly in public life, because there is a churning that happens.
Right.
It even happens in private, right? I absolutely agree. And I think that if organization isn't aware that change is just wearing people down, that's why it's important to document why there is change and communicate it. I think that working with that messy middle, I love that. I coach leaders. I'm amazed. Leaders at the top of the pyramids don't understand their obligation to make sure that they are watching metrics, and they don't have to be real fancy metric systems, and use performance reviews and not have it be 100 things. But if you're trying to change the interface with the customer, there should be a few things like that. But understand that it's also linked to how employees are treated. And so if you are using those and even celebrating it, what we did was we would celebrate those changes. And when I was a general manager, I had a much wider spread, right? Span of control. So you would point out those groups that had the better on-time performance, safety record, and showcase that. But your obligation is to drill down, and those middle managers, they have work units that report to them, and to sit with them. And it may be that, if you're at the top, if you're the general manager, that may be a couple levels. So you may have to do it through staff meetings with those folks or coaching your direct reports to make sure they understand. And that's through a planning process that you lay out what your goals are for the years going forward. And you have a vision. It's not just having on-time performance for 7 days. It's positioning that agency to have the best on-time performance, have strong customer satisfaction, but also teach them what that information means so they start to think about what the response is. And if you're watching certain metrics, you'll know which middle managers are getting there. And they are the most resistant, but you can get them to change it, because it's, to your point, people don't wake up and say, oh, I'm going to go be a creep to my employees. And I mean, only people that have serious health issues would go to work like that. And to communicate it and to reinforce it. It's a feedback loop. It's constantly saying and celebrating short-term and longer-term things, but make sure they know where they're going to. And, like some people go, well, I don't know if I'm going to communicate to the frontline employees. I'm going, but they're the ones who are delivering that. And they think about this. When I do focus groups, now I do it with clients in these agencies, they have such great thoughts about what that system should look like. And what are the improvements? Whenever I hear someone come in, we're working with a sub to a pretty big company, and they're doing all this work. We're saying, but what about the employees? Especially post-COVID, they know what else also needs to be done because they're hearing it from customers and themselves. So it's just constantly checking in. And it doesn't have to be every day, but it's having a process. And I was thinking about this as I was getting ready to talk to you. I made sure that I regularly communicated in writing, and I had quarterly meetings with all of the supervisors, managers to talk about where we were, what was working, what wasn't. And I also did employee forums on a regular basis because I knew that for a while, the middle managers and even the supervisors wouldn't communicate my message. Right. So I had to model it so they could learn what it was. And they didn't have to say, well, we don't know what in the world she's doing. What's her new idea? it was consistent and it was against those major few directions about turning it around.
Yeah, that's good. I like that consistency. I'd add probably their persistency as well, and then making it easier for them to get on board is also what I'm hearing there, Deb. I want to go back then to New Jersey Transit for a while, and I want to talk about steak dinners here for a bit. So what I'm hearing is that you were given a task where others thought that you were going to fail. Potentially, you didn't use these words, but potentially getting set up for failure, that no one thought that you were going to be successful. You then turned it around by treating people like they mattered, engaging them in the change process, sharing openly with them the metrics that you're trying to move, and then incentivizing them with something that would be meaningful to them.
Right.
What my question is what happened to the naysayers at that point?
That's a good question. Well, there were some that continue to be a naysayer. Of course. I mean, you don't change everyone, but there were so many people that had been naysayers that were the advocates, and they felt better, and the pride of that. And, that's a really good question, because eventually I was asked to come in and take that model across the agency, of an agency that was one of the best in the country, but we messed up on a new service delivery. It's funny. I think that what happened, and in fact, the people that were my counterparts as superintendents at the time were like, she's not good. This woman isn't going to be able to make it. And some of them, I know for a fact, they undercut me. I know, because people eventually came and told me those stories. And that's what happens when you get these opportunities. But they started calling me and asking for help. And then the executive director called me in and put me in charge of implementing that type of program across the agency. And those middle management and leaders across the railroad, and even on the bus side, started modeling that work. And so, when the executive director is commending you and asking you to take that to the agency, that's a pretty strong endorsement of the quality of your work. And clearly there were still people who were going to disparage me, but change takes a while. You just have to know, when you're looking at the metrics and you're getting those kinds of good reviews from employees and customers in a critical mass, that's where, when I started off by saying, you're making a difference, it feels so good to watch that. And when you're in leadership, not everyone's going to agree with you.
Yeah. All right. But you're right. The joy that comes from that and having that change and seeing that you're impacting all of those people's lives. And that's what caught my attention early in our interview, Dave, where you said that one of the things was not just making a meaningful impact in the world around the transit, you were also making a meaningful impact into the lives of the individuals that were working with you. And I think that's wonderful. It's probably a good time now to segue over to this concept of revitalization, particularly when you spoke about moving from one team over to the larger agency, etc. I want to spend a short amount of time setting the scene here for the audience, and then I'm going to hand over to you and hear your reflections, Deb. So what we're talking about here, everyone, is the concept that you might have a team that was potentially once high performing, but over time fractures start to appear. So when a team is formed, there's all kinds of team performance models that you can use, Drexler, Sibbett and others, and they all go through some kind of forming stage. They go through forming, storming, norming, performing. That's probably the most common one that everyone knows, but there's a number of these models where you're building a team from scratch and you're building it up to be a high-performance team. And you could be on a project like Deb was saying, like a project that's initially goes well, but then over time, in the heat of battle, you start having fractures in the relationships and things start to get a bit hairy and a bit frayed at the edges. Tell us a little bit more, Deb, about how you do that. How do you step into a stage where you've got a team that may have had some glory days, but those glory days are behind them, and now that they're bickering and they're arguing and the relationships are starting to fracture?
Well, we've done work both in public and private on that one. What I do, whether I'm the leader inside the organization or with a consultant team, is we spend time doing one-on-one interviews with the top tier of that team, generally 2 levels. And we use a strategic planning model for this. And we create a SWOT analysis of that team. Because if you did it, generally when you find that, when you're brought in on that type of engagement and that's described to you, the trust is very low. So you've got to figure out a way how to jumpstart trust, which we know it takes a long time to build trust, but it doesn't take long to destroy trust, right?
Yeah.
So we do the SWOT analysis, and then we then facilitate a meeting, and we frame the issues to the team on their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we frame those disconnects, because generally there isn't consensus about most of those areas. And I'm a big believer in sharing trade-offs or disconnects. So you as a team, over half of you see it this way, but there's a disconnect because the others see it just the opposite, or there's something that's different than them. And we share that with them because there's no attribution. We do that on a confidential basis. We do brief the executive, but they'll go, well, who said that? Everyone is assured of confidentiality because this doesn't work unless you do that. And then we do a series of group exercises with that. Generally, what we'll do is we'll array the SWOT analysis, and we'll do, the old whiteboard with the stick-ums, all that, the circles, all those things that we use in these dynamic sessions. And we will ask them to rank those areas of issues. And then we do workout sessions, because you'll probably have like 20 people, and small group theory, 8 to 12 is the best to work this out. But generally, you want to have both the top 2 levels, because then you're sort of getting close to the middle management who you need in there. And you do workout sessions, and they report back, and they ask questions, and then they end up setting up cross-cutting teams to do the work on that and share that information. An organization that really wants to change and go back to being a high-performing team is willing to share some of the feedback, because they're not the only ones that think that. And then you just keep working that through. And I usually recommend that you add some other people to those teams. There might be an issue that's more HR and you need some classification work done, whatever. But you put those teams together, and then the organizations that really want to change usually keep us on board to help do the project management, to facilitate the discussions and the workout sessions with some type of governance model where the head of the organization has a steering committee of some people that can sign off on those recommendations. But it's those kinds of interviews, and then starkly arraying that information, and work with the leader to be able to acknowledge where they could do a better job, both in the opening of it and at the wrap up. And our team works very hard to, even in those conversations, say, wait a minute, okay, let's be tough on the issue, not each other, and call people on that. And also, when we see another disconnect, pointing that out, so that we're trying to model that openness of dialogue, which has probably been closed down. But when we've done that with teams, it's another sort of eureka, But when you do it in a group that isn't trust each other, the real information doesn't get a rate on that board. And so they're going, oh, I had no idea. There was an organization, AT&T used to have a consulting team. And the gentleman that ran that, AT&T paid a lot of money for one of the big consulting firms to put together that model. And I've lifted from much of that because I thought that was the SWOT analysis and bringing it in, because then you can do this work in a day with ongoing follow-up. But the leader has to be really motivated. And I've had some leaders that wouldn't even share the information with their direct reports. So, and someday I'll write that story because it is chilling when I tell you what happened, because they didn't have a transparent organization. There wasn't a lot of trust and things festered. So it imploded.
Interesting. I'm hearing lots of key words there again, Deb. So the first one around trust. So trust probably has been broken. So you do need to have that ability to be open about that. Be open and vulnerable and say, okay, we haven't got all of this right, and kind of sticking up your hand and saying, okay, we didn't get it right, but we want to get it right from now on. Can we reset? I'm hearing some of that in there. Having open communication again and engagement, having people involved in that process to revitalise the team and get it back together, and openly sharing what everyone thinks the problems are. And I think you'll find that most of the time the vision or the desire that everyone is trying to get towards is a common one, and they've just kind of lost sight of it somewhere along the line. And if they talk to each other again, they'll discover that common ground again. And
there's one other point. There's another organization that I helped sort of turn around. Yeah. They were really just, like you said, they lost their way, and they had won huge programs, and they believed their own press. I always like to say that they believe their own press. And they asked me to help them think about their interface with the customer. And I said, okay. So I had access to pretty high level people in that organization, huge, big client. And they gave me very raw data. And I briefed the leadership of that company and of the group involved with this. And they're like, who said that? Oh, come on. And I like, oh, wait, time out. I verified it. It isn't a one-off. And there's things that you're probably doing that you don't even realize that is presenting that perception, right? They were starting to be, arrogant. And I sat through a prep for a presentation with the client when they were trying to figure out ways they could turn this around. And I'm like, okay, time out, gang. They would do these PowerPoints. They'd all be on one side of the room. They'd be just speaking about how good they were, not engaging, not sharing other experiences. And that's all the client wanted, because they knew that they had access to, and they started to change it. And even where they sat in those meetings, it was, and eventually they built trust back again with the client and their own team. This is the funniest part about this. This is so obvious, Mick, and you know this because you've worked in corporate America. They weren't involving the people closest to the client.
Yeah.
The program people were not in the meetings about positioning for a big opportunity, because every day they're hearing about what the client wants and doesn't want. And they were key communicators, and they were just saying, oh, it's just business development instead of the operating people. And they started working together. And the operating person, I remember I said, I need you to go to this meeting. He goes, why would I go to a BD meeting? I go, because you do BD every day. He goes, oh, yeah. And it was a turnaround. And that person became a key person for one of the hugest wins of that company.
So there's a few things there I want to unpack. The first one is we've stumbled back in again to having people at the table for the conversation that are closest to the action. So it sounds just the same as your New Jersey Transit story, that the ones that are on the shop floor, so to speak, actually do have their finger on the pulse and generally have the best ideas as to what we can do. And in this case, you're talking about someone in an operational role who can provide the best input to essentially a BD strategy, a business development strategy, because they're hearing the customer's pain points every single day, the person that's closest to the action. So listen to them.
Mick, oh, sorry.
No, go.
There's one other point about that you just made me think about that when you were saying it. What we have to remember is every employee wears a different hat. They're a parent. They're involved in their church. They coach. They're doing something. And so they are ambassadors for an organization, particularly when you're in a public environment. And if they know what's going on, they're going to be saying positive things because the people in their church or at the soccer game are asking them about things. And it's like, I coined the term in-reach on that because most organizations go, oh, we got to do outreach and make sure everybody knows about what we're doing and do marketing and all that. And I'll go, it's a lot cheaper to just do in-reach. I mean, you still want to do marketing, but especially when you're a public purpose organization, those people interface. If you work for a global company, it's not quite the same, but they still have things that they're doing and they get information all the time. And so when you open that up, that's why those are great people to talk to, because who knows what their son-in-law or their brother-in-law does or their sister-in-law does. You just don't know. So you give them the information that they can feel proud of their organization and represent it. Yeah. And when they hear bad things, they bring it back. It's such tentacles that just open up. Just think about how many people touch things when you use that model.
Yeah, good. And once again, communication is key there for that in-reach. It's communicating the right messages so that if they do find themselves at that barbecue where someone is asking them, oh, yeah, tell me about that. And it could be a future prospective employee even, that someone might want to join the company, et cetera. It's not just a potential customer. So having those brand ambassadors everywhere that understand why the company does what they do and is able to articulate it. And that can only happen through clarity of communication. The other one I want to touch on, Deb, and we haven't used this word yet, but we've stumbled across it twice as well. You mentioned before about multifunctional teams or cross-functional teams working on a change effort together. And now you're talking about a company that you've worked for who went in, spent most of the time talking about themselves instead of the other party. The word that's coming into my mind is empathy. What role does empathy have in either change management or in revitalization of a team that's fractured?
Well, I was going to tell you about a wonderful person who is a personal friend of mine. We were best friends in college and we collaborated together. And she was part of the group that created Compassion in the Workplace.
Okay.
Started post 9/11. And what we're seeing, we found post 9/11 and certainly post pandemic, is that the organizations that are demonstrating compassion on an individual and a corporate level have better outcomes. And it's kind of like when something happens, for example, we had a horrible tragedy when I was the general manager up in Buffalo. A bus operator was killed on duty. Unnecessary accident. And right away, the press and everyone wanted a cause. And he was very well liked by his peers, but everyone knew he cut corners all the time. And he did that day. But I'll never forget, I made sure that I went out and met with the employees and made sure they had grief counseling and everything. But I advised the executive director, because it was a multimodal agency and I ran the transit system and he had other responsibilities. I advised him that he not say anything about the accident, express just sadness and talk about condolences to the family and the employees, and that we are going to complete the investigation. But today it's about supporting the family and the employees. This has been a very devastating blow. And we did the investigation and there was cause, but we gave them time to be able to heal themselves, because everybody, like when these things happen, I always say in transit, like the police, it's like a blue badge, like, the secrets, everybody knows what happened. But we needed to get a healing period through that. And I found that when you acknowledge those losses and deal with it, and make sure those programs are in place, that it helps the individual and it helps the whole entity.
Yeah.
Right. We saw that with 9/11, when the organizations in New York and some of the and Washington, those of us that weren't at the building, but we were, it was like we all had people that we knew. So it's empathy, compassion. We know it's documented in the literature that when you express that, and some people will say, well, if I treat this employee like that after an accident, obviously, if someone's at cause, you don't go and give them I'm so sorry. You have to be clear about, we'll complete the investigation, but you acknowledge the individual and the larger entity's pain, and you do programs that allow for that conversation. One of the assignments I had when I worked at the Port Authority, there were homeless living in all the transportation facilities. And the Port Authority owns airports, the bus terminal, the World Trade Center. And I was asked to lead a task force to figure out a strategy for the Port Authority. And we went back and we talked to the employees. We also talked to experts on what is the right way to deal with the presence of homeless individuals in transportation facilities. And it became a model in the country. It's not consistently followed in those agencies right now, but what we found is that the agency was telling the police, just basically, they said it nicer, but they said, get those people out of the facilities. It's working against our image. So the police are empathetic, right? And they were like, well, where are they going to go? And the operations people think about the public bathrooms, all that. They had to clean up after people that had taken up quarters in some of these facilities. Right. But in the meantime, they were also giving them money. They were giving diapers for their babies. They were doing all the organization's telling you, you have to do this. And so we ended up doing focus groups with the police officer, the police, the operations people. And it became clear that there was this tension about doing the business and being proud of an organization and seeing your facilities just not being able to be kept up because of that. So we ended up putting a strategy together that was a business strategy about rules and regulations for what's appropriate in public space. And it got tested in the courts. But we brought in social workers to help when the police officers would walk through the facilities and say, you really can't sleep here. This isn't for this. They would have a social worker, and we helped enlarge the social service network with time, talent, and treasure that the Port Authority did well, to provide some other facilities for those individuals that would accept help, assistance, to get into the pipeline to address whether it's mental health, substance abuse, whatever. And that was a beautiful example of how there was a business strategy, but we hadn't documented how difficult that was for the morale of the frontline employees. And so we were then able to also let the customers know, because they were giving money. Panhandling was okay in their mind because they felt horrible commuting to New York to make money and seeing these people. And we made them aware of the programs that were peripheral to those facilities, and did clothing drives. There was soup kitchen. And so it helped the employees who had to interface in an empathetic manner, give them tools that they felt that they were listened to. And so that was individually helped them, but they also felt like there was a sense of the larger social responsibility. And it was a strategy that everyone understood. And that's like the epitome of how you look at empathy at an individual and a corporate level. And the Port Authority had horrible reputation. The advocates were being critical of how they were dealing with homeless in their facilities. And, you asked me, how do you know when change is happening? When advocates start telling the business case for the Port Authority and saying they are not places for people to live, but the Port Authority is giving back in a socially conscious way to enlarge the system in the communities where they operate. And there's a lot that's been written on that.
There's some great lessons there about empathy and corporate social responsibility for sure, Deb. The takeaway that I want to add there, it came back to the same thing again that we've already discussed a couple of times, which is asking those that are closest to the action because they know what's really going on. So you might, in the boardroom, come up with an amazing plan, an amazing strategy that looks great on paper, but test it. Test it with those that are closest to the action and you'll know whether it's well thought through or not. Yeah, really good sharing, Deb. That's probably a good time for us to draw it to a close. So I'd like to bring it to our rapid fire round. So these are the questions we ask all of our guests, Deb. So
I didn't know I had a rapid fire round.
Yeah, so here we go. So what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I wish I knew how exciting transportation was and maybe have done some more education in that sector. I would have probably done my master's in a different area.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, you've been very successful with liberal arts, but yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. What is your favorite book?
Oh, wow. Well, actually, what I pick up regularly is one of Mary Oliver's poetry books.
Nice. Okay.
I mean, there's lots of books I love reading, but there's something about just for pick me up during the day or the morning, her poetry just speaks to me. It grounds me when I might be having a good or a bad day.
All right. Nice share. And what's your favorite quote?
No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Eleanor Roosevelt.
That's powerful.
International Woman on International Women's Day.
That's a great way to close us out on International Women's Day to hear that. Can you say that one more time? That's really powerful.
No one can make you feel inferior without your permission.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you, Eleanor Roosevelt, the true international woman.
Yeah, well done, Deb. And finally, I'd like to give you the floor. I'm sure there's going to be people out there that are curious to know more and they may want to contact the Wathen Group to look at some services, etc. So how do people find you, Deb?
Well, the wathengroup.com is our website, thewathengroup.com, or my email, Deborah@thewathengroup.com. I answer it. Love it. Love to talk to people about these issues.
Brilliant.
We need more work in this area.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Deb, and thank you for joining us on International Women's Day as an inspirational woman in, I have to say it, I wish it wasn't, but a male-dominated industry. You're a shining star. You show the world what can be done when you treat people like they matter, when you engage them in change efforts, and you show them the way things could be done. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure. I've learned a lot, and I know that the audience would have learned a lot as well. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mixbeers.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.